Hey guys, how's everyone doing? This is Sir Jedi Sentinel, and welcome back to another timeline, another life. Our review retrospective on David Warner as the Unbound Doctor. Today we are looking at The New Adventures of Bernice Summerfield Volume 5, Buried Memories. Released in September of 2019, directed by Scott Hancock, Buried Memories stars Lisa Bowerman as Bernice Summerfield and David Warner as the Doctor. As always, I put a blanket spoiler warning in place because I am doing these unscripted. If you do not wish to be spoiled for the title in question, in the description box below is the link to Big Finish's website, where you can purchase The New Adventures of Bernice Summerfield Volume 5, Buried Memories. This set consists of 4 stories. The Pride of the Lampion by Allison Leeds, Clear History by Doris V. Sutherland, Dead and Breakfast by April McCaffrey, and Burrowed Time by Lonnie Woodward. Lonnie, I forget how it's said. The premise of this set, well, there is a couple, is that this is Benny and the Doctor's first adventures in her universe after the events at the end of the Ruler of the Universe, The New Adventures of Bernice Summerfield, Volume 4. In the behind-the-scenes stuff, Lisa and I think it was Scott Hancock. There was a couple different interviews, and I'm forgetting who was interviewed for what story. But Lisa and, like I said, I believe Scott Hancock said there was a story arc they wanted to do with this Doctor in this universe, now that he's in the wrong universe. But they couldn't just jump right into it. They had to build up to it. And that's essentially what this set is. It's kind of the deep breath before the plunge. Some of the other premises of this set include there is a strong focus on history in this set, particularly with Benny's expertise as an archaeologist and the importance of history throughout these stories. As well, one more premise to this is that this set consists of stories written by, at the time, entirely new writers who had never written for Big Finish before, trying to expand the pool and bring in new talent. Apparently, I don't remember this at all, but listening to the behind the scenes stuff, there was a contest at the time to bring in a writer to write a new Bernice Summerfield story. And after that contest, the producers kind of realized, well, some of these stories are really good, some of these writers show great talent, so let's do this set to bring more writers in. Overall thoughts on the set, now that we're kind of drifting away from behind the scenes stuff and getting into the set itself. It's a good set. It's a decent set. It's not as good as what came before. We had a really strong streak with the Unbound universe, Ruler of the Universe, and the Angel of History from the story so far, Volume 2. But I will say this set is much more consistent. The previous sets, again, had quality all over the place. You had some decent stuff, you had some good stuff, and then you had some phenomenal standout stuff. There isn't anything like that here. It's overall just good, but it is very consistent compared to those previous sets. Just the quality is not as good as the standouts of those sets. I will say, before we get into the stories themselves, I will say my ranking for these stories is Pride of the Lampion is the weakest, then Burrowed Time, then Dead and Breakfast, and my favorite story in this set was Clear History. Lisa Bowerman and David Warner once again have really good chemistry, playing off each other really well, and I imagine a lot of it does stem from their real-life chemistry. So, let's get into the stories themselves. First, we have Pride of the Lampion. In their first adventure in this universe together, the Doctor brings Benny to a bazaar, essentially a swap meet, to my understanding. While browsing one of the stalls, Benny finds a mysterious artifact she thinks might have some historic value, although it is very clear that the shopkeeper is just trying to scam her. But despite his scams, which Benny even sees through, she seems to think that there is actually merit in this artifact, which seems to come from a race called the Lampions, which, spoiler, the shopkeep just named after looking at a lamp on his desk. But despite the fact that this is obviously a scam, and even Benny knew it was a scam, every time she looks it up, every time she researches, she finds stuff pertaining to the Lampions. Artifacts suddenly show up where they weren't before. History is being rewritten. Planets that have always existed have suddenly been destroyed by the Lampions, and it becomes very clear that as Benny researches and delves deeper, she is actually creating this history of the Lampions. The reason excuse me, the reason this is the weakest story for me is because Benny feels so out of character. Like, at the end of the story, we get a little throwaway explanation saying she was possessed by the artifact, but it kind of feels too little too late because, admittedly, I don't have that much knowledge of Bernice Summerfield. I haven't listened to all of her releases. In fact, aside from Oh No It Isn't and, Big Finish's first release, which was a Bernice Summerfield story, and Shadow of the Scourge, a 7th Doctor Who audio that had Ace and Benny as the companions. Outside of those, I haven't really listened to a lot of Bernice Summerfield stuff, except prior to this, the first 4 audios of the New Adventures of Bernice Summerfield. And where I'm getting this out of character feeling for Benny is that in what my limited knowledge is of the character, Benny is a good archaeologist. She is a great archaeologist. She puts in the work. She knows what's expected of her. So the fact that she just keeps barging on forward, storming through, despite the very obvious red flags that are being raised, it feels really out of character to her. And again, I don't know if this is just me not really being experienced with the character, because in the behind the scenes stuff, again, Lisa Bowerman and Scott Hancock kind of say that, Benny is looking for that big, great discovery that'll put her name in the textbooks. And when she thinks she's onto that, it kind of gives her this tunnel vision. But, like I said, because of my limited experience with the character and what little I do know, it just seems like she is being out of character for this story. We also don't get a lot of Benny and the Doctor in this story, because after they have a falling out, because the Doctor sees something is going on and Benny doesn't want to believe it, the Doctor takes the TARDIS and starts traveling through time, trying to find where these alleged historical events of the Lampion took place. I'll save that for a little later, talking about the characterization of the Doctor in this story. That brings us to the second story in the set, Clear History, which was my favorite story in the set. Benny brings the Doctor to a planet she wrote a dissertation on. It was a colonized planet that has since been settled down, but the colonists, the settlers, have made a virtual world, a virtual reality world, that the Doctor and Benny have to log into more as avatars than their actual selves. And they notice weird things. The history of this world being presented doesn't match what Benny wrote in her dissertation. And there seems to be a mysterious young woman who says something is wrong with this world. So I have a reading on this story just because of the time I listened to it, mid-2024. That I think is very different from the time it was written. Again, going to the behind the scenes, Lisa Bowerman mentioned that this story was kind of commenting on AI and how we're getting more and more digital. And yes, there was a lot of that in this story. But in particular, this story to me feels like a commentary. Again, this was published in 2019 and I'm listening to this in 2024, so this is just my reading based on the context of when I listened to it. This story feels like a commentary on the death of physical media. So, because Benny is noticing that all the history she wrote about on this planet in this society has changed, because it's all digitally kept records. So there is no physical paper trail. And similarly, because it was all digital, no one in the population seems to remember what the original history was. And it reminds me of recent events. Like, in Christmas of 2023, Best Buy announced that in 2024, they will no longer be carrying physical media, movies, CDs, games. And this year, 2024, just last month or 2 months ago, May or June of 2024, Sony Japan said they will be ceasing production of physical media. Again, DVDs, Blu-ray, that kind of thing. So, this is a very relevant story right now, and it's why it sticks out to me, because it's such a good commentary on what is happening. The next story, Dead and Breakfast. Dead and Breakfast is just a bunch of fun. Benny and the Doctor accidentally crash land on a planet that has very strict laws pertaining to normality, that moral guidelines and such, which leads them to having to pose as a married couple. And this is a story in particular where the Doctor and Benny's dynamic really just shines, having to play as a married couple, and Lisa and David's chemistry really comes to light here. I do want to comment too, in a Discord group chat, one of my friends, I was talking about the New Adventures of Bernice Summerfield series, and I mentioned how, like I did in my video reviews, how the Unbound universe and the Ruler of the Universe were better realized versions of the 10th Doctor's story arc from the 10th Doctor era. One of my friends mentioned how he thought, similarly, the Doctor and Benny's dynamic was a better realized version of the 12th Doctor and Clara Oswald's dynamic. I never really saw that until Dead and Breakfast. It is really obvious. They're a play on that type of dynamic in this story. And it's just fun. This story, as far as the historical bent of Buried Memories, focuses more on the history of legends. What is the seed of truth at the root of this legend? Because while they are posing as a married couple on this planet, Benny has integrated herself into an archaeological dig of this legendary queen and her famous sword. And over the course of the story, Benny learns, Benny kind of reveals that the idea she was a queen is kind of a mistranslation, and she was more of a tyrant or a general or a bloodthirsty war criminal. And that leads us to the final story, Borrowed Time. Again, the Doctor and Benny arrive at the site of an archaeological dig, and where they are looking for a mysterious train that seemed to vanish thousands of years ago. And they are pulled underground, where they find the train still in operation, with seemingly one passenger left. The train is sentient, and it is doing everything it can to save the life of this last passenger. This story just really didn't engage me. That's why I thought it was the second weakest story in the set. Whereas Pride of the Lampion, I had issues with Benny's character in that. This one just wasn't engaging. It's got some good ideas, especially related to the history of the last passenger. And again, the historical bent of this story is just more, in historical records versus the actual accounts and memories and feelings of the people involved in that event. So as I kind of talked about these stories, this set in particular has a much stronger focus on Benny than it does on the Doctor or Benny and the Doctor. And that's fine. Lisa Bowerman gives really strong performances throughout, even in Pride of the Lampion, where again, just because of my inexperience with the character, she feels out of character, but Lisa Bowerman is still a strong actress, giving these great performances. In a way, actually, it feels like Benny, the Doctor, is actually Benny's companion, instead of the other way around. Speaking of the Doctor, in this particular set, it feels like we're focusing more on the Doctor's grumpiness, so to speak. I don't know if I've talked about it too much in previous reviews, but this Doctor is a very grumpy individual. But Warner is so charismatic, it's the charming kind of grumpy, like William Hartnell or John Pertwee. which makes sense because this is an alternate universe version of the Third Doctor. We get a much stronger focus on his grumpiness, presumably because instead of exploring how he wants to, Benny really is the one leading the charge in this set. And we also see that the Doctor's greatest enemy, this Doctor's greatest enemy, it's not the Daleks or the Master. It's boredom. Like, this Doctor repeatedly mentions how much he hates being bored. Probably more so than any other Doctor. In fact, in one story, he says, you know how boredom and I don't get along. I'd probably jump it in a dark alleyway, which is such a hilarious line. But yeah, that's really what the focus of this Doctor seems to be. Overall, the New Adventures of Bernice Summerfield, Volume 5, Buried Memories, again, is fine. It is a step down from, again, just that previous really strong streak we had, but it makes up for it by just being really consistent and honestly showing the chemistry between Lisa Bowerman and David Warner at their absolute best. But those are just my thoughts. Have you heard Buried Memories? What are yours? Start a conversation in the comments below. And remember to like, comment, subscribe. Click the bell next to subscribe to get notifications when I upload. Share the video around. All of it helps my channel grow. In the description box below, you will also find the link to my socials where you can follow me and get updates on the channel. This is Sir Jedi Sentinel, and I'll see you guys next time when the Time Lords learn about another Doctor's existence in the universe. A Doctor who shouldn't belong in this universe. When we look at the New Adventures of Bernice Summerfield, Volume 6, Lost in Translation.